Imagine waking up to find your cabin being demolished without warning. The HOA decided that your home needed to be torn down to make way for their new lake path. But there's one problem. You own the shoreline and their clubhouse, and they had no idea what they were messing with. So what happens next? A showdown that leaves the HOA scrambling and me standing victorious. But trust me, it gets a whole lot crazier from here. Stay tuned to find out how I flipped the script on an HOA that thought they could control everything. Let me tell you something. Life can throw some wild curveballs, but this one takes the cake. I'm Jack Anderson, and for years, I had a quiet little cabin on the edge of a lake, a place to get away from the madness of everyday life. It wasn't fancy, a 1970s throwback with some character, a private dock, and a view of the water that made everything feel right in the world. But things went from peaceful to pure chaos when the Homeowners Association, HOA, decided my cabin was in the way of their perfect plans. They didn't ask, they didn't consult, they just showed up with bulldozers, thinking they could tear down my home to build a so-called lake path for the community. Not just any demolition, either. They were going to destroy everything that made my cabin home. Here's where it gets interesting. When I stepped outside, I realized something that changed everything. The land they thought they controlled, it was mine. All of it. The shoreline, the dock, and, get this, their precious clubhouse. They've been using it for years, holding meetings, social events, and running things like they own the place. Turns out I did. So, instead of folding, I decided to fight back. What followed was a game-changing move that flipped the tables on them and made sure they'd never forget who they were messing with. Keep watching to see how the HOA learned the hard way that you shouldn't mess with someone who knows exactly what they own. It all started that morning when I heard the unmistakable sound of machinery approaching my cabin. I had just woken up, enjoying my routine cup of coffee, the warm sun filtering through the trees, casting a soft glow over the lake. It was a peaceful day, the kind you get when you've spent years building something you love. My cabin by the water wasn't just a property. It was a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe easy away from the noise of city life. A place where I could hear nothing but the gentle waves against the shore, the rustling leaves in the trees, and the occasional call of a bird flying by. But this particular morning, as I sipped my coffee and watched the morning mist lift off the water, the silence was broken. I could hear the hum of engines, a crew of machines, and voices I didn't recognize, carrying over the breeze. That's when I saw it. They were coming down the narrow dirt path leading to my cabin. The sound of the heavy equipment rolling closer sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just the usual construction noise you get in a neighborhood. No, this was something much worse. It was the sound of an invasion. I set my coffee cup down on the deck and walked to the front window, squinting to get a better look. To my shock, I saw the familiar faces of the HOA board members standing there, including Brianna Whitaker, the HOA president. She was in her usual power suit, clipboard in hand, giving orders to a small army of workers. It didn't take a genius to figure out that they were preparing for some major construction work, and unfortunately for me, that meant the destruction of my cabin. The first thought that ran through my mind was, what the hell is going on? There was no notice, no warning, nothing. No phone call, no email, no letter in the mail, just an army of people coming to destroy my property. And the worst part? They had no legal right to do so. I quickly grabbed my phone and called up Tina Mitchell, a local journalist who specialized in exposing HOA corruption and abuses of power. We had spoken before about some minor issues with the HOA, but this was different. This wasn't just petty enforcement of obscure rules. They were about to tear down my home, my sanctuary. "Trevor, what's going on?" she asked as soon as she picked up the phone. I explained the situation as quickly as I could. "Tina, they're here. The HOA, Brianna Whitaker and her crew. They've brought in construction equipment. It looks like they're planning to destroy my cabin." "Wait, what?" Tina exclaimed. "Are you serious? I thought you had some leeway with them on this property. You're in the clear, right?" I was furious at her question, but I understood her concern. She didn't know the full story yet. I'm in the clear, legally, but they're acting like they own this place. They've been threatening me for months, but I thought this was just another one of their power trips. This is different. This is serious. I'm not just losing my cabin. They're planning to bulldoze my dock, the shoreline, and the land that surrounds it. I need you to come over. I need help. Tina didn't hesitate. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't do anything rash. Let's figure out the best way to handle this. I hung up and grabbed my jacket, heading out the door. As I walked down the path to the dock, I could see Brianna and her crew making their way towards the cabin. They were treating this like some routine job. Brianna was standing on the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, shouting orders. She didn't even notice me walking up behind her. "Brianna," I called out, my voice firm. She turned, her perfect blonde hair catching the sunlight. She smiled that smile I'd come to dread, the one that looked polite, but underneath it was all cold authority. "Mr. Anderson," she said, greeting me like an old friend. "I'm glad you could join us. I'm afraid we're going to have to take some action here. We've had a complaint, and the HOA has decided that your cabin is in the way of our new lake path. You're violating several HOA guidelines, and we've given you ample time to remove your property, but now, well, it's time for us to take matters into our own hands." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Take matters into your own hands? "Brianna, this is my land. I own the shoreline. My dock, my cabin, all of this." I threw my arm out, gesturing toward the lake and the land surrounding it. "I've owned it for years. You have no right to come here and tear this place down. You can't just bulldoze it because you want to build a path. You need to back off." She rolled her eyes, sighing dramatically as though she were dealing with a child. "Oh, Trevor, I understand that you're upset, but this is bigger than you. It's about the community. The HOA has been making decisions in the best interest of everyone here. We need this path to improve the property values. You'll see. It'll look great when it's done." I felt the anger rise in my chest. She was pretending to be the good guy, while making it sound like my whole life was in the way of some supposed community improvement. The thing was, I wasn't having it. I pointed to the bulldozer and the construction crew. "That machine doesn't belong here. You have no right to be here. I looked into this. I have the deeds, the legal paperwork, and I've spoken to the county. This property is legally mine. You have no permission to destroy it. Do you understand that?" Brianna's expression faltered for just a moment before she tried to regain control. "You're making a scene, Trevor. You're causing a disruption. If you don't comply, we'll have to take legal action." I wasn't sure if she was bluffing or not, but I wasn't about to let her intimidate me. "Fine," I said. "If you want to fight, you'll get one. But just so you know, this fight isn't just with me. This is my land, and I'll make sure the whole neighborhood knows exactly what you're doing here today." Brianna's eyes narrowed, her smile faltering for a brief moment. "You'll regret this." Just then, Tina arrived with her camera and notebook. She was ready for action, and she immediately started documenting everything. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I didn't know what their next move was, but I was done letting them get away with abusing their power. Tina walked over to Brianna. "We're not moving until you prove you have the legal right to do this," Tina said, her voice loud enough for the entire crew to hear. "Show us the paperwork. Show us your authorization. Because from what I see, this isn't just a matter of making a path. It's about tearing down someone's home without any legal grounds." The workers were standing around, unsure of what to do. Brianna was trying to act confident, but it was clear she wasn't prepared for this. She didn't expect anyone to fight back. She didn't expect anyone to know their rights and challenge her. That's when things began to shift. The people who had been working for her started whispering to each other. The realization was starting to set in. They were complicit in this illegal act, and they weren't sure if they should continue. Brianna's expression turned even colder. "This is a waste of time," she snapped. "I'm calling the authorities." That's when the situation took a turn I wasn't expecting. Brianna, in her typical overbearing fashion, decided to escalate things further by calling 911. She wasn't going to accept being challenged. She needed to have me removed, by force if necessary. I stood there, watching her as she typed in her phone, knowing full well what she was doing. It was the ultimate power play, and it was about to backfire spectacularly. As the minutes ticked by, I began to wonder, could this be the moment that turned the tide in my favor? Would I finally be able to show the HOA that they couldn't just roll over me like they had done to so many others? As I stood there, watching Brianna's fingers rapidly tapping the screen of her phone, I felt a sense of dread mixed with determination. The fact that she was calling the authorities was both frustrating and comical at the same time. She was so confident that the police would back her up that she didn't realize how deep she was digging herself into a hole. But in that moment, I knew I wasn't just fighting for my cabin. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been bullied or intimidated by an HOA. Tina stood beside me, her camera ready to capture everything. We had a front row seat to what could either be the biggest mistake Brianna would ever make or the start of a long, drawn-out battle. I couldn't help but feel a slight rush of adrenaline. This was it. It was no longer just about my property. It was about standing up to an oppressive force that thought it could control everything. Brianna's phone call ended as she looked at me with a sneer. "They'll be here soon," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You'll see. This will all be over soon." She turned her back on us and walked toward her crew, but I noticed a slight hesitation in her step, almost like she was beginning to doubt her own authority. The workers, who had been moving equipment with purpose just moments before, now seemed uncertain. Some of them exchanged nervous glances, and others simply stood still, unsure of what to do next. The calmness of the lake in front of me stood in stark contrast to the storm brewing just off the shore. The sound of birds in the trees and the soft lapping of water against the dock felt like a reminder of the serenity that was now at risk. How could anyone, let alone an HOA, want to destroy something so peaceful? But that was exactly what Brianna and her crew were trying to do, destroy not just my cabin, but my peace, my escape. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the flashing lights of a police car in the distance. My stomach sank, but I stood my ground. This wasn't just about protecting my property anymore. This was about showing Brianna and the HOA that they couldn't push me around. And if they thought that calling the police would make me back down, they were gravely mistaken. When the officers finally arrived, they didn't waste any time. Two of them got out of the car and walked toward us, their faces neutral. I could see them eyeing the situation, trying to make sense of what was happening. Brianna wasted no time explaining her version of events. "Officer," she began, her voice taking on that sweet, authoritative tone she always used when she wanted to sound official. "This man has been obstructing the HOA's construction project. We have every right to build here, and he's been making it impossible for us to proceed. He's refusing to comply with our orders, and it's causing a disturbance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here she was, lying through her teeth, trying to paint me as the problem. I stepped forward and interrupted her. "Excuse me, officer," I said, making sure my voice was calm but firm. "Let me explain. I own this land. I have the deed right here." I pulled out the legal papers and held them up for the officers to see. This cabin, the dock, and everything surrounding it, including the shoreline, belongs to me. The HOA has no right to be here. They're trying to tear down my property without any legal grounds, and I've already spoken with the county about this. They have no authority to do what they're doing. The officers exchanged looks, and I could tell they were beginning to listen. Brianna, however, wasn't done. "This is absurd," she said, her voice rising in anger. "He's lying. This property is part of the community, and we've been maintaining it for years. It's a shared resource, and if he refuses to comply, then we'll have to take legal action." I shook my head. "Brianna, this isn't just some HOA property. You've been lying to people, including the workers here. This cabin, the land, and the shoreline belong to me. I got the paperwork to prove it, and I've also got the legal right to defend my property. You can't just come in here and destroy it because you want to build a path. This is my home, not your playground." The tension in the air was palpable. Brianna's anger was reaching its boiling point, but she was starting to realize that her usual tactics weren't working. She wasn't used to people pushing back, especially not with the law on their side. One of the officers, a man in his mid-30s with short crop hair, took a step forward. "Sir, I'm going to need to take a look at those papers," he said, his tone professional but not dismissive. He had clearly heard enough of Brianna's side of the story and wanted to verify what was really going on. I handed over the documents, my heart pounding in my chest. The officer took a moment to examine the papers, glancing back at Brianna and the workers standing behind her. The silence was deafening. Brianna's face turned an angry shade of red, but there was nothing she could do now. The truth was on my side. After a long pause, the officer looked at me and nodded. These papers seem to be in order. I don't see any legal reason why you should have to allow the HOA to take down your property. As far as I can tell, they don't have the right to be here. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was prepared for this battle to escalate, but hearing the officer confirm my ownership of the land was a small victory. Brianna, on the other hand, looked like she'd been slapped across the face. "This is outrageous," she muttered under her breath, but I could see the fight drain out of her. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't seem so confident. The workers who had once been her loyal followers were now looking uncertain, shifting uneasily on their feet. The officer turned to Brianna and her team. "You're going to have to leave. You're trespassing on private property. If you want to contest this, you'll have to go through legal channels. But for now, you need to pack up and go." Brianna's mouth dropped open, but there was nothing she could say. She could only stand there, seething with fury as she realized the game was up. I felt a surge of triumph. Not only had I stood my ground, but I had proven that the HOA's bullying tactics wouldn't work on me. As I watched Brianna and her team pack up their things and leave, a feeling of relief washed over me. This wasn't over, though. I knew that Brianna wouldn't let this go quietly. There would be more to come, more legal threats, and more battles ahead. But for now, I had one. The officers turned to me before they left. "If there's anything else, don't hesitate to give us a call," the younger officer said. I nodded in thanks as they climbed into their car and drove off, leaving me standing on my dock, breathing in the fresh, crisp air. I turned to Tina, who had been documenting everything, and gave her a small smile. "Thanks for being here. I think we're just getting started, but at least we've got the upper hand now." Tina grinned back. "We sure do. But you know Brianna won't give up that easily. This is just the beginning." As I watched her drive off, the reality of what had just happened settled in. This wasn't just about a piece of property anymore. This was about power, about control, and about the way some people think they can take everything from others. Brianna had tried to destroy my home, but in the end, she had only exposed her own weakness. The next few weeks would be critical. I knew Brianna wouldn't stop trying to make my life difficult, but I was ready. I had the truth on my side, and that was more than enough to keep me going. As I stood on my dock, the ripples in the lake reflecting the soft glow of the afternoon sun, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The HOA had backed down for now, but I knew this wouldn't be the end. Brianna Whitaker, the president of the Harmony Heights Homeowners Association, wasn't the type to let go of a perceived defeat so easily. If anything, I had just set off a chain of events that would either change the future of this neighborhood or tear it apart. I walked back into the cabin, taking a deep breath and letting the warmth of my home envelop me. There was a sense of peace that had returned, but with it came the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. If Brianna truly believed she could just waltz in and destroy everything that I'd worked hard for, she was sorely mistaken. And now that the police had been involved, I knew she'd be even more desperate to try to regain control. The battle lines were drawn, but I had the upper hand. I knew the law. I knew my rights. And most importantly, I knew Brianna's tactics. She wasn't just a bureaucrat looking to enforce HOA rules. She was a tyrant trying to control people's lives for her own gain. That was something I could never let slide. The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Tina. "Trevor, I have news," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "What's going on?" I asked, already suspecting that Brianna wasn't done making waves. "I did some digging into the HOA's finances," Tina said, "and it's worse than we thought. Brianna has been using the HOA's budget for her personal expenses. Spa trips, expensive dinners, even a leadership weekend getaway at a resort. And that's just the start. The financial records don't lie." I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. Brianna wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a thief. She had been siphoning money from the very people she was supposed to protect and serve. My instincts had been right all along. This wasn't just about property disputes. It was about corruption at the highest level. I knew there had to be something more. I said, my voice calm but steady. How soon can you get all of this information into the hands of the right people? Tina hesitated for a moment before answering. I'm already on it. I'm contacting a journalist I know who specializes in real estate and corruption. She's interested in doing an expose on this. The idea of bringing Brianna's corruption to light felt like the right thing to do, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been taken advantage of by an HOA. But at the same time, it felt risky. Taking on someone as powerful as Brianna could have repercussions. All right, I said, let's do it. But let's make sure we have everything lined up first. We need evidence, and we need it airtight. Tina agreed, and we hung up. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and meetings. I knew I was walking a fine line. If Brianna found out what we were planning, she could easily retaliate. But I wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not after everything she had tried to do. Then, the unexpected happened. I was walking along the dock, preparing for another day of fishing, when I saw something that made my stomach drop. A group of workers from the HOA were gathered near my property, preparing to start construction. I was ready this time. Instead of charging in with anger or frustration, I approached them calmly. Hey, I called out, my voice firm. What do you think you're doing? The workers froze, looking at each other nervously. Brianna was nowhere to be seen, but I could sense her influence even in her absence. We've been instructed to begin work on the new path, sir, one of the workers said, his voice faltering. You've been notified multiple times. No, I said, shaking my head. You haven't been notified of anything. I've told Brianna, and I've told the HOA. This property is mine, and if you try to tear down any more of it, I'll have legal action taken. The worker glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The tension was palpable. I'm just following orders, he muttered, almost apologetically. Well, your orders are wrong, I said. I don't know who's behind this, but it's not happening today. Now, pack up and get off my property. The workers hesitated for a moment before slowly gathering their tools and walking away. I stood there, watching them leave, knowing that this wouldn't be the last time I had to confront them. But for now, I had won another small victory. I returned to the cabin, feeling the weight of what was to come. Brianna wasn't going to let go of her plans easily, but I had learned something crucial. She wasn't as invincible as she thought. Her power was based on intimidation, lies, and manipulation. And now that I had exposed part of it, she was vulnerable. I spent the next few days strategizing. I knew I needed to act quickly. The longer I waited, the more chances Brianna would have to regroup and retaliate. I wasn't going to let her steal my peace, my property, or my future. It wasn't long before I received a call from Tina. You're not going to believe this, she said, her voice urgent. I just got off the phone with a reporter from the local news. They're interested in doing a segment on Brianna's financial mismanagement and the HOA's shady practices. This is our chance to expose everything. The idea of being on the news felt like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could bring attention to the situation and rally the community behind me. On the other hand, it could escalate things beyond my control. But at this point, I didn't care. I was tired of living in fear of Brianna and her tyrannical grip on the neighborhood. Let's do it, I said, my voice steady with resolve. It's time for her to face the consequences of her actions. The next week, the local news crew arrived at my cabin, cameras rolling and microphones in hand. The interview went as smoothly as I could have hoped for, and the reporter was more than willing to expose the HOA's corruption. Brianna's name was soon plastered across headlines, and the public reaction was swift. Neighbors who had once been afraid to speak out began reaching out to me, offering their support. It was a surreal feeling, knowing that I had sparked a change in the community. What had once been a quiet lake cabin was now the epicenter of a battle for property rights, fairness, and justice. But as the news coverage spread, Brianna's desperation only grew. She tried to make herself the victim, claiming that I was attacking the HOA and that I was in the wrong. But it was clear to everyone that she had lost the moral high ground. The more she tried to defend herself, the more she dug her own grave. The story was no longer just about me. It was about the power of standing up to bullies and the importance of fighting for what's right. The community was rallying behind me, and that's when I knew this battle wasn't just about saving my cabin. It was about saving the entire neighborhood from the stranglehold of an HOA that had overstepped its bounds. And as for Brianna, well, she hadn't heard the last of me. Not by a long shot. The tension was rising. Brianna had thought she could control everything, that the HOA had power over every aspect of our lives, including what happened on our properties. But there was something she didn't expect, me, and I wasn't going to let her steamroll me into submission anymore. The day I'd been preparing for had arrived, and I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down at the rocky drop below. I wasn't going to back down. I had the upper hand, and I knew it. My legal documents, my GPS data, everything I'd carefully gathered was about to come crashing down on her and the HOA. The morning of the HOA meeting, I'd already made up my mind. It wasn't just about taking back control of my property. It was about exposing Brianna and the corruption within the HOA for everyone to see. It was about ensuring that she wouldn't bully anyone else the way she tried to bully me. I wasn't just going to fight for my rights. I was going to take her down with the truth and let the neighborhood finally see who she really was. As I walked to the community center, where the meeting would take place, I noticed the familiar faces of my neighbors, some of whom I had grown close to over the past few weeks. They'd been hearing about the growing tension between Brianna and me. They were starting to understand just how corrupt she was. I had been fighting for my rights, but I wasn't alone anymore. There were a lot of us who were tired of her rule over this neighborhood. The room was packed when I walked in. A large group of residents had gathered, more than I expected, to be honest. It was a tense atmosphere, as if everyone knew that something monumental was about to unfold. Brianna stood at the front, looking perfectly put together as usual, with her hair styled, her expensive suit pressed, and her HOA binder in hand like some kind of weapon. She was trying to maintain the authority she'd lost months ago, but I could see the cracks in her facade. Her grip on the neighborhood was slipping. "Good evening, everyone," Brianna began, her voice confident but faltering slightly at the edges. "I want to address any concerns that have been circulating about our HOA's finances. I've heard the rumors, and I'm here to set the record straight." I stepped forward, my folder of evidence clutched tightly in my hands. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, waiting for what was about to happen. It felt like the calm before a storm, and I was ready to let it all out. "I have some questions," I said firmly, my voice carrying across the room. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Everyone turned their attention to me. Brianna's face paled, and I saw her posture stiffen. "Mr. Simmons," she said, "try to regain some semblance of control. I'm sure concerns can be addressed through proper channels. This meeting is for legitimate business, not personal vendettas." I ignored her attempt to dismiss me. I had the upper hand now. "Actually, Brianna, this is about something far more important than your personal vendetta against me. This is about accountability. It's about transparency. It's about the truth." I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of bank statements, the evidence that would take her down. The room was silent. People were leaning in, eager to hear what I was about to say. I placed the documents on the table and let everyone get a good look at what was in front of them. "Can you explain," I continued, "why the HOA paid $15,000 to a law firm that claims they've never worked for this association?" Brianna's face went ashen. She took a deep breath, clearly trying to hold on to her composure, but I could see her unraveling. "And what about this?" I added, flipping through the pages. "I found multiple charges on HOA accounts, spa treatments, expensive dinners, a $5,000 resort trip that was supposed to be a leadership conference. Care to explain where all this money went?" I could feel the eyes in the room burning through her. Some of the residents were already shaking their heads, whispering amongst themselves. Others, like Thomas, had been watching Brianna's behavior for months, and now they knew the truth. Brianna's facade was cracking, but she wasn't done yet. "This is outrageous," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is a personal attack. He's using this to ruin me." "No, Brianna," I said, my voice steady, "this isn't an attack. This is the truth. You've been using your position to line your pockets and bully everyone else into submission. And now the truth is out. You can't hide behind your binder and your fancy suits anymore." I could feel a surge of satisfaction as I saw the anger and fear flash across her face. For the first time, Brianna wasn't the one holding all the power. She was the one being exposed. I wasn't done yet. I also have something else that will really interest you. I pulled out the GPS data, the final piece of the puzzle. Here is the proof that you've been messing with my boat. I've got the coordinates, the timestamps, and the exact path my boat took when you moved it. And I've got 15 minutes of stop time right next to the community pond. I guess you forgot that I was tracking it the whole time, didn't you? The gasps in the room were audible. Brianna froze, her hand clutching the edge of the podium as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. She didn't know how to respond. For the first time in the meeting, she was speechless. I had her, cornered, exposed, and caught red-handed. I turned to the room, addressing the residents who had gathered. This isn't just about a dock or a boat. It's about power. It's about corruption. Brianna has been manipulating you, lying to you, and using the HOA as a way to control and intimidate us all. But today, we take our power back. Today, we stop her. The room erupted. Some residents stood and clapped, while others voiced their support with loud cheers. Thomas was grinning from ear to ear, clearly enjoying the show. It was clear now that Brianna had lost control of the situation. She was done. And then came the moment of finality. A voice from the back of the room called out, "Enough's enough. Let's vote her out." Now, the room was filled with unanimous support, and within minutes, a vote was called. Brianna tried to argue, but no one was listening to her anymore. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The votes were counted, and Brianna was officially removed as HOA president. The room erupted into applause, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on my shoulders lifted. The victory wasn't just mine. It was for everyone in the neighborhood who had been terrorized by Brianna's authoritarian rule. I turned to her one last time as she stood there, defeated, her perfect smile gone. "I guess that's the end of your reign," I said quietly, savoring the moment. She didn't say anything back. She just stared at me, her face a mixture of rage and disbelief. The power had shifted. The community had spoken, and Brianna was no longer in control. The next few days felt surreal. The once oppressive, stifling air of the neighborhood had lifted, replaced by a sense of palpable freedom. I'd won, but it wasn't just my victory. It was everyone's. The residents who had been too scared to speak up, who had quietly endured Brianna's tyrannical rule, were now free to reclaim their peace. What had been a neighborhood divided was now unified in the face of truth and justice. As the news of Brianna's downfall spread, the atmosphere around the community changed. People who had kept their heads down, afraid to speak out against the HOA president, were now openly expressing their support. The energy at the next HOA meeting was unlike anything I had ever experienced in this place. It wasn't tense, it wasn't combative. There was an excitement in the air, a sense of renewal. For the first time, people were talking about real issues, neighborhood improvements, safety, and how to rebuild the sense of community that Brianna had so ruthlessly torn apart. I arrived at the meeting to find it buzzing with activity. The room, which had once been a battleground for petty rules and ridiculous fines, was now filled with a spirit of cooperation. Thomas, who had become a close friend throughout this ordeal, greeted me with a slap on the back. "Looks like we got ourselves a new start, Trevor," he said, his voice filled with satisfaction. I smiled back. "Yeah, I think we do." When the meeting started, it was clear this wasn't going to be like any other. The new board, made up of people who were genuinely interested in making the neighborhood better, announced that they were doing away with the excessive fines and the punitive measures that had defined Brianna's reign. It felt like a breath of fresh air. The tension that had once defined these meetings was gone, replaced by open dialogue and shared responsibility. We discussed future improvements to the community, focusing on what would actually benefit the residents instead of keeping us in line with arbitrary rules. Brianna's shadow had finally been cast off, and people were genuinely excited about the future. But the aftermath wasn't all smooth sailing. Brianna, though ousted from her position as president, still had a hold on the HOA, and she wasn't going down quietly. Rumors started circulating that she was planning her next move, trying to regain control by using her influence to manipulate the remaining board members. It wasn't just her pride on the line. It was her reputation, and with the truth out, that reputation was shot. I wasn't naive enough to think that the battle was over. I'd fought to expose the truth, but I knew that Brianna wouldn't just walk away. She would fight back, and I had to be ready. But at that moment, I was enjoying the peace I'd fought so hard for, knowing that I'd made a difference. It wasn't long before Brianna showed up again, though. This time, it wasn't with a binder or a lecture on HOA rules. She came with a lawyer, someone who looked serious, like they'd spent their entire career working in corporate law, ready to take down anyone who got in their way. I could tell from a look on her face that she was taking this as a personal vendetta. Brianna didn't know how to lose gracefully, and she wasn't going to let me walk away without a fight. She demanded that I remove my cattle operation from the pond, claiming that the entire setup was a violation of zoning laws. She argued that the property had always been part of the HOA's responsibility, and that I had no right to transform it into a livestock facility. She insisted that my disruption had caused harm to the community's reputation, even though we all knew the truth, that Brianna's own greed and manipulation had caused more harm than anything else. But this time, I wasn't alone. I had the support of the new HOA board, which had already shown that it was ready to stand up to Brianna's tactics. And I had the law on my side. My property was legally mine, and the cattle operation was perfectly legal within the zoning laws. Brianna's threats were nothing but empty words. Her lawyer tried to intimidate me, citing legal precedents and arguing that I was causing undue harm to the property values of the neighborhood. But I had already researched everything thoroughly, and I had a clear plan in place. I wasn't about to back down this time. The lawyer wasn't prepared for the onslaught of evidence I presented. I showed him the legal documentation that proved I had every right to use the pond however I saw fit. I made it clear that any claims of harm to the neighborhood were baseless, especially considering the positive attention the livestock operation had attracted. I wasn't the villain here. I was simply standing up for my rights. It didn't take long for Brianna to realize she was fighting a losing battle. The truth had already come out, and her attempts to regain control were falling flat. She had no leg to stand on. The new HOA board, now fully aware of her corruption, sided with me. They voted to keep the livestock operation in place, and Brianna's appeal was shot down. But the most satisfying moment came when the community came together to support me. People who had been silent during Brianna's reign now spoke out, sharing their own stories of how they had been harassed by her. It was clear that for the first time, the community had united, not just against Brianna, but for a better, more cooperative future. The impact of Brianna's downfall rippled through the entire neighborhood. It wasn't just about her being removed from power. It was about what followed. For the first time in years, the community began to reevaluate what it meant to live in a neighborhood governed by a homeowners association. The new HOA board, under the leadership of Thomas and others who had experienced the negative side of Brianna's reign, took a radically different approach to governance. No longer was the focus on punishing people for small infractions or imposing absurd rules that no one had agreed to. Instead, the focus shifted to maintaining the beauty and functionality of the neighborhood, while respecting the rights of individual homeowners. For the first time, the HOA became a resource for residents, not an enemy. People could now freely discuss their concerns without the fear of retribution from an overbearing HOA president. The positive energy spread throughout the community. The lake, once a source of conflict, became a place for everyone to enjoy. Neighbors who had been at odds with each other now gathered together at the water's edge, watching the cattle and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere that had returned. The pond, once a symbol of Brianna's control, had been transformed into a thriving wetland, home to birds and wildlife. It was a reminder that even the most divisive moments could lead to something beautiful. For me, personally, the experience was transformative. I'd gone from a man fighting to protect his property to a symbol of resistance against corruption. But it wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about getting even. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against you. The biggest lesson I took from this whole ordeal was the power of unity. No matter how strong an individual might think they can't fight the collective will of a united community. Brianna had spent years bullying people into submission, but when the neighborhood came together, she was powerless. And that's the real victory. It wasn't just about me getting my way. It was about the neighborhood reclaiming its power and dignity. The story of Brianna and me became a cautionary tale for other communities struggling with HOA overreach. It wasn't just about property rights. It was about the importance of transparency, fairness, and accountability. When people stand up for each other, they can achieve great things. If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, don't let them push you around. Stand up for your rights and take your community back. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, subscribe, and share your own HOA experiences in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going.